The royal banquet was a spectacle of grandeur. Golden chandeliers illuminated the grand hall as nobles and dignitaries from across the lands gathered to celebrate the alliance between the kingdoms of Joseon and Goryeo. Laughter and music filled the air, yet amidst the dazzling jewels and silken robes, Crown Prince Jungkook of Joseon sat stoically at the head table. His sharp jawline and piercing gaze gave him an aura of unshakable authority. But inside, he felt a deep weariness. Love, to Jungkook, was nothing but a distraction, a fabrication of poets and dreamers. He had grown up watching marriages forged in the fires of diplomacy, not affection. He had resolved long ago that his path would be no different. Duty came first, always. But that conviction was about to shatter. The heavy doors to the banquet halls swung open, and the herald announced her arrival, presenting Her Royal Highness, Princess Hwayeon of Goryeo. All heads turned, including Jungkook's, though his initial glance was one of mere obligation. Then he saw her. She entered with the grace of a swan gliding across a still lake, her movements light yet deliberate. Her gown, a shimmering blend of silver and lavender, seemed to reflect the very essence of the moonlight. But it wasn't her attire that held him captive. It was her presence. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, carried a quiet strength that spoke volumes more than words ever could. She held herself with a reserved air, as if daring anyone to try and understand her. For a man who had sworn off love, this was disarming. Jungkook's chest tightened, his breath hitching in his throat. The grand hall, with its cacophony of voices and music, seemed to fade until she was all he could see. "She's exquisite," he murmured, the words slipping out before he could catch them. Beside him, his childhood friend and royal commander Taeyoung raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Caught your eye, has she?" "Careful, Jungkook. That one's untouchable. She's here for diplomacy, not romance." Jungkook barely heard him. His feet moved before his mind could process the decision. He descended the dais, his strides purposeful yet uncharacteristically unsteady. The crowd seemed to part for him, as if sensing the weight of his determination. Finally, he stood in her path. "Your Highness," he said, bowing deeply. His voice betrayed the storm raging within him. "I am Jungkook, Crown Prince of Joseon." Princess Hwayeon curtsied, her gaze meeting his. "It is an honor, Your Highness." Her voice was steady, but her expression revealed little. She was polite. Distant a wall he was certain she had built for protection. Yet her eyes lingered for a heartbeat too long. And in that moment, Jungkook felt the crackling of something unspoken. That night, Jungkook paced his chambers, his mind racing. Her image was seared into his thoughts, her voice an echo he couldn't silence. He clenched his fists, frustrated by his inability to control these unfamiliar emotions. "Why does she feel like a dream I've waited my whole life for?" he muttered to himself. Love was not supposed to be part of his story. And yet, here it was, demanding to be written. The next morning, unable to resist, Jungkook found himself wandering the palace gardens. He told himself it was mere coincidence when he stumbled upon her, sitting by the lotus pond. Her fingers traced delicate patterns in the water, her expression serene yet guarded, as though she were lost in thought, but wary of being interrupted. "You're far from the banquet, princess," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She turned, startled at first, but her features softened into a neutral mask when she saw him. "And you're far from your royal duties, prince," he chuckled, a rare sound that surprised even himself. "Sometimes duties can wait, but moments like this—" He hesitated, his gaze locking onto hers. "They cannot." She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Do all princes speak in riddles, or is it just you?" He grinned, undeterred by her cold demeanor. Only when the occasion calls for it. She looked away, her fingers resuming their dance in the water. And what occasion is that, Your Highness? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. When I found something worth breaking every rule for. Her hand paused mid-motion, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood gracefully, brushing off her skirts. I'm not something to be found, Crown Prince. I am not here to entertain your whims. Jungkook's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. Perhaps not, but I am not one to give up so easily. Their interactions continued, each encounter filled with playful banter and subtle challenges. YN remained reserved, her walls firmly in place, but Jungkook's persistence began to wear on her defenses. One evening, as they walked through the garden under the moonlight, he finally dared to ask, "Why do you keep everyone at arm's length?" She stopped, turning to face him. Her eyes were sharp, but her voice was softer than he expected. Because the closer people get, the more power they have to hurt you. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Not everyone is out to hurt you, YN. Perhaps not, but I've learned not to take chances. Jungkook reached out, gently taking her hand. Then let me be the one chance you take. Her breath hitched, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Instead, she let him hold her hand, her eyes searching his for any sign of insincerity. She found none. Their relationship deepened slowly, built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. Jungkook's teasing became a source of warmth rather than irritation, and YN found herself smiling more often in his presence. One evening, as they sat by the pond, Jungkook leaned in closer, his voice laced with mischief. Tell me, princess, does the crown prince make your heart race, or is it just me? YN rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged at her lips. You're insufferable, Your Highness. I'll take that as a yes, he quipped, leaning back with a satisfied grin. She shook her head, but her gaze softened as she looked at him. You're impossible, Jungkook. He reached for her hand, his expression turning serious. And yet, here you are, not walking away. She sighed, her resolve finally breaking. Then, without warning, she leaned in and kissed him. The touch of her lips was soft yet deliberate, catching Jungkook completely off guard. His eyes widened for a moment before he melted into the kiss, his hand gently cradling her cheek. When they pulled apart, Jungkook's lips curved into a mischievous grin. Well, that was unexpected. Should I assume the princess has finally fallen for my charms? YN raised an eyebrow, her tone playful. Don't let it get to your head, Crown Prince. I was simply proving a point. Oh, he teased, leaning closer. And what point might that be? She smirked, brushing past him as she stood. That sometimes actions speak louder than words. Jungkook laughed, quickly catching up to her and intertwining their fingers. Well, princess, if that's the case, I'll have to find more reasons for you to act on impulse. She rolled her eyes but didn't pull her hand away. The moon hung high above the palace, its soft glow bathing the garden in silver light. YN tried to hide the warmth in her cheeks as she walked ahead, Jungkook's fingers still intertwined with hers. He followed her with that infuriatingly charming grin plastered on his face, the one that made her heart flutter against her will. You're awfully quiet, princess, Jungkook teased, pulling her to a stop. Could it be that my charms have left you speechless? She turned to face him, trying to muster a glare, but her rosy cheeks betrayed her. In your dreams, Crown Prince. Jungkook's grin widened. He stepped closer, leaving barely a breath of space between them. Oh, I dream of many things. YN, but right now. His voice softened, dipping into something more tender. I can't stop thinking about the kiss you just stole from me. Her eyes widened. Stole? I didn't. Before she could finish, Jungkook cupped her cheek and leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was as gentle as the breeze, but carried the weight of his feelings. This time, it was deliberate, a statement rather than a question. He lingered for a moment before pulling back, his forehead resting against hers. "There," he whispered, his voice laced with playful satisfaction. "I'm just taking back what's mine." Wee-Hen's face turned crimson as she stared up at him, her heart hammering against her ribcage. You're impossible," she stammered, her words barely audible. "And yet, you're still here," he countered with a teasing glint in his eyes. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Why is that, princess? Tell me." She bit her lip, her walls crumbling under his gaze. She looked away, but Jungkook gently tilted her chin back, making her meet his eyes. "Why?" he said softly, his voice now free of teasing. "I know you're scared to let someone in, but I'm not like the others. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I've fallen for you." Her breath hitched as his words sank in. He smiled gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was the first time I saw you walk into that banquet hall, or maybe it was every moment since then. All I know is that my world feels empty without you in it." YN felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. "Jungkook," she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't have to say anything," he interrupted, his tone reassuring. "I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust me. Just don't push me away." She shook her head, a small, genuine smile breaking through. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice light but affectionate. "But somehow, you're my idiot." Jungkook laughed softly, his grin returning. "I'll take that as a confession, princess." YN rolled her eyes, though her cheeks were still flushed. "Don't let it go to your head." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing her ear. "Too late." She let out a small laugh, and he tightened his hold on her hand, his heart swelling at the sound. They stood there under the moonlight, their unspoken fears and vulnerabilities fading into the night. Finally, YN looked up at him, her gaze steady and warm. "I think I've fallen for you too, Jungkook." His smile softened, his eyes sparkling with a mix of relief and joy. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that." And then, without hesitation, he kissed her again, this time with all the love and passion he had kept bottled up for so long. When they finally pulled apart, YN's face was a deeper shade of red, and Jungkook chuckled, his thumb brushing over her now thoroughly flushed cheeks. "Looks like the princess is blushing again," he teased, his voice full of affection. "Shut up, Jungkook," she muttered, but the small smile tugging at her lips betrayed her annoyance. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they began walking back toward the palace. "You better get used to this, princess. I'm not letting you go now." YN leaned into him, her heart finally at peace. "You're lucky I'm too tired to argue," she murmured, though her smile didn't waver. Jungkook laughed, planting a soft kiss on her temple. "Lucky? No, YN. Meeting you was the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me." And under the moonlit crown of the night sky, the crown prince and his princess began the first chapter of their forever. The moon hung high above the palace, its soft glow bathing the garden in silver light. YN tried to hide the warmth in her cheeks as she walked ahead, Jungkook's fingers still intertwined with hers. He followed her with that infuriatingly charming grin plastered on his face, the one that made her heart flutter against her will.